Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because Joe Harris boards the mothership to discuss pastime from Madcave Studios. Now, come on board to go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Harris. Thank you for coming to the Vertical Stars Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, my pleasure. So, I will start off with a question of inspiration. So, inspired love for comics and who your earliest influences?
Wow. I discovered The Dark Knight Returns when I was, how old was I even? It was 1986, 1987. So I was just a young teenager.
Yeah.
Uh, Super Friends cartoons, the early Marvel cartoons, stuff like that really fed that for me. But it was when I found The Dark Knight Returns and I understood what comics could be that I really had the aspiration to work.
Now, the one I'm thinking of, if I'm correct, we're talking X-Men animated series, we're probably talking Spider-Man animated series, or are we talking about the Fantastic Four and Iron Man cartoons?
Well, we're talking about that era, the 1966 cartoons.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
They
that's what I grew up with. And a little bit later, it was like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and stuff like
okay.
that. Spider-Man on the Electric Company. I don't know if that's something you're too familiar with, but it was mind-blowing when I was a toddler.
Was that the live action Spider-Man that was around for a little while?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
I remember watching it. I don't remember how old I because I was born in 1980, so I kind of remember some of the they had a live action Spider-Man that I think can't remember where it was. It was like on like I think I can't remember when it was, but I remember seeing some of the episodes. I think that was just really awesome. But
Hmm.
I remember the cartoons of comic books that to me was always peak was the Batman animated, X-Men animated, and Spider-Man that came out in the
Hmm.
early mid 90s, and that was I was a teenager, but still I thought the cartoons were fantastic.
Yeah, no, if you were that age in the 90s, I know the X-Men cartoon really hit with people. When it came out for me, I was like, I read all these. You know? But you did, but you enjoy what you enjoy, and that's.
Well, I was more of a DC nerd coming in
Uh,
the 80s and early 90s, so I didn't my knowledge of the X-Men was mostly from the cartoon, and then closely I think released near the same time was the Jim Lee X-Men number one, like when that came out.
mhm,
That was like that's when I
sure,
was like, oh my God, that's what that is. Those some of those panels still stick in my memory forever.
for sure.
So you're now the writer of a Madcave Studios comic called Pastime. Oh, and as a baseball nerd, are you also a baseball nerd?
I am a huge baseball nerd.
Is it fair to ask what your team is?
Yankees.
Oh no, I'm an Orioles fan.
Unapologetically, I'm born and raised in New York City.
See, I'm Baltimore Orioles, so obviously we've had
Oh,
the
it's
conflict of
hard.
late.
It's hard. You have my sympathy.
It's been a long 42 years. That's for damn sure.
Uh,
41 years now because we haven't had this year yet. Probably not going to win it all though. I'm pretty sure the Yankees are going to be the one to do it. And I must
we'll see.
I can only imagine that what's like to be a Yankee fan tracking Aaron Judge over the last like 9 years.
It's been amazing, but the glory years for me were the dynasty run between
Oh,
1996 and 2001.
yeah.
For me, that's like a seminal thing. If it all fits together into one event for me, and it's like the center of my life. So this,
So
so baseball, and in particular Yankee baseball, is a passion of mine.
now, when Derek Jeter came up in, I think it was 92, was it? I think it was 1992 when Jeter came up.
95, he came up at
95.
the end of the year.
Did you know he was going to be the star they turned out to be, or was
Well,
there?
he was the number one draft pick, so I remember hearing his name.
Yeah.
And then when they called him up on the team, they never really played him in 1995. In fact, that year the Mariners and the Yankees met in the first wild card series, and both A-Rod and Derek Jeter were on the bench for their respective teams. But 1996, he became the starting shortstop, and it was wonderful. It was just to have someone like that to cheer for. It was just.
It was, I will say, even though I was not a Yankee fan, it was an amazing run. I mean, obviously the Mauro Rivera stuff, obviously he was wonderful,
Mhm.
Pettit, stuff like that. But underappreciated Bernie Williams
Absolutely.
was totally unappreciated, I think, after retirement, but he was the face of that team, it felt like, for quite some time.
He was there first too. He
Yeah.
was like their first homegrown guy that became the core of that team.
And yeah, like I said, I love baseball, and that's why I was so fascinated when I saw the solicits for pastime. I was like, this is something I can definitely get behind.
Right
Um,
on. It's not something you see on the stands.
No, I think I mean it's hard, but the key to me is baseball, but not just baseball like now it's 1920s baseball, which is a very unique era. So why did you think the 20s was the era of baseball you thought I wanted to explore?
Well, I'll tell you, uh, one of the big cruxes of this story is that in the 20s, the old barnstorming league, they
Mm,
used to have some teams and some games in that league that would do sensational things. They were almost like the Harlem Globetrotters. They
yeah.
had to put on a show out in the rural areas of the country where there might not have been big league ball. And one of the things that the barnstorming league brought in was baseball under the lights at night.
Mm,
So I set the most of this series in 1923 because that's when baseball was first played under these, really rickety light stanchions
mm,
with jumper cables to a truck and this scrappy thing. And our protagonist is this guy named Henry, who due to a very dark situation and affliction in his life, which is, I guess, a little bit of a reveal, but if you look at the logo, you can kindly you might be able to figure out what that's
mm.
about. Um, because of night baseball, he can't play during the day because of his affliction, but night baseball gives him the opportunity. So that's why I said it there.
And I think the great thing too about baseball, I mean, obviously we call about baseball, and that's where the name comes, the American pastime. There's a universality to baseball that one of my favorite movies of all time is Field of Dreams,
Mhm.
which is just a genius movie. And they're talking about when they talk about like how time, the passage of time, but yet baseball still kind of continues throughout. It kind of makes it through all time.
Very heartwarming movie.
Yeah, is there like do you view baseball as a universal something that's universal? Do you kind of view even though your story is the 20s, does it have something that is still at you as identifiable for the modern audience? It can only just the baseball connection, but your characters as well.
Yeah, well, it's sports, it's baseball with horror. So I'm not just trying to sell somebody on the intricacies of the game, even though I would like to think that when we do present the game of baseball, it feels accurate. Uh, Russell and I gave him directions and he sent breakdowns. We worked really hard to make this feel authentic.
Hmm.
So and I think that you're not just watching baseball and these baseball scenes. I hope we're advancing our characters through them as well. And because of the horror, I think there's a universal appeal to this that even for people that might not be into baseball, I don't think they're going to be lost.
Hmm.
And I yeah, I think there's something in there for everybody because the horror angle is huge as well.
So the art on the book is being provided by Russell Mark Olson. So how did this partnership first start?
Well, I brought the series to Madcave Studios, and editor Mike Martz and I were going back and forth trying to settle on an artist, and he had shown me Russell's work, and I thought, I think this looks great, and Mike agreed, and then we reached out to him, and it was pretty easy.
So what is from a standpoint of his art, what does it bring to the table? How does the visuals help enhance the story that you're telling through his work?
It's funny, Russell lives in the UK, but he's from St. Louis, Missouri. So he brings a bit of a heartland element to it as well. He has affection for the Midwest, um, and that's really where this series is centered. I'm a Yankees fan, but that's not what I wrote about in this particular story.
So there's no throw-ins of like obviously we would have Ruth during this time period, the 1920s. Any like
We're
the
not watching Babe Ruth, or they do give passing mention of some famous ball players of the era, which I hope adds to its authenticity. But yeah, it's just as far as the horror goes, it's very grounded as well, so as to fit with this. I kind of looked at this as the way that I pitched this was the natural meets Interview with the Vampire.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So when you're thinking of Henry Hayes, right?
Yep.
Um, obviously, once again, he has this dream of he's going to play baseball. What does
Mhm.
baseball mean to Henry Hayes?
Well, Henry Hayes was a promising young player. When he was in college, he was looking at the possibility of playing professional ball back when baseball was young. He was an anomaly among his peers because he was really gifted. But as we'll find out in the book, something really big happened in this country around 1917, and Henry was shipped off to Europe and didn't come home in one piece. And he thought that his dream of playing baseball was over. And so I think he's the perfect vehicle for this.
And once again, the idea that obviously due to what happened, assuming we're talking about World War One, when unless I'm completely wrong on that,
No, no, you were right. World War One.
so when you have obviously when the what happened and he lost his dream, at least in the moment in his head, was disappearing. What the, why is he not able to move on from that dream? Is there some like is there what is that connection that he's not able to say this is not my life anymore. I can do this. Where's the fixation?
Well, he gave up a lot to go and serve his country, and he came back broken in a couple of very important ways. So baseball is almost redemptive. It gives him, as opposed to being to feeling a desolation over his situation, baseball is aspirational. It's something little kids dream about doing. So I'd like to think that if you read through the character of Henry Hayes, you will be. I'd like to think you'll be cheering him and a little reviled sometimes as well, because that's the tension in this book.
Now, to refer to another baseball movie, Moneyball. That
Mm,
line, it's hard not to be romantic about baseball. There's something to be said about that. That there's something about the play of the game. When
sure.
the other thing with Henry Hayes as well, what he has to do in order to play the game, um, as the fans, how does he deserve the happiness of baseball, considering what he needs to do to do that?
Well, that's a good question, and that's what we're going to explore because he's not a hero. If you notice, I'm just referring to him as our protagonist.
Yeah.
He's got a dark side, but I'd like to think he's sympathetic.
How much are you able to share about the nature of the dark affliction that is preventing him from playing during the day?
Well, I don't know. Let's think of, um, which kind of monsters can come out in the daytime and
Hmm.
have really sharp teeth as framed in our pastime logo on the cover. Those are my dangling hints.
Now, the other thing interesting about the situation, once again, he's barnstorming, he's going to play on a team. How easy is it to hide that secret from teammates that that he's playing along with? Is that something that he is easy for him to keep? What is he? Is it different? What he has to do to maintain that secret? How? I'm trying to think the best way to phrase it. How bad is it, or how difficult is it going to be for him to maintain that secret?
Well, that's a big crux of the story. Things fall apart almost from the beginning, as I think everyone will see. Nothing tends to go just right. For every step forward, there's two steps back.
And I think, like I said, I think that's so interesting. Also, from a horror standpoint as well, how are you able to portray the horror genre within the framework of a comic book? Obviously, in films, it's a lot of jump scares, things of that nature. Comic books have to be
Right.
presented in a very different way to present, or horror has to be presented in a very different way. So, how are you navigating the horror genre within the comic book page?
By having these characters do horrific things. And because they are depicted by someone like Russell, who has a particular style that you might not think says horror right at the outset, I think there's a tension that you get when you do things like that. When you work with an artist who brings a certain sensibility that isn't on the nose
Hmm.
in terms of what the sensibility of the book might have seemed before we were paired up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you get there's a lot of tension around people doing some terrible things and some explosive consequences.
Now, we're presenting. Henry Hayes as the protagonist. Obviously, with every protagonist is an antagonist. Is it more the situational antagonist, or what is the primary conflict for him that he's going to find himself within?
Well, there's a reporter that's looking to get to the bottom of his story, so there is that angle in here as well. But ultimately, I think reality and life just existing is the antagonist for Henry Hayes.
And I think it's such a cool pairing. Um, so how fun are some of the more horror elements of the comic that you got to write, and then obviously visualize as the arc act returns to you?
Yeah, no, that was great because a few pages prior, you would have been watching this baseball game that felt very authentic and grounded with Russell's art depicting it. And then when we get to these horror scenes, that sort of one thing always leads to another in this book. The horror scenes are still portrayed in that sort of Midwest looking, rustic, through the veil sort of gauzy look at American life back then. And I think, getting back to what I said earlier about tension, I think that's where we really can mine some horror because you don't expect that to be horrific.
And when you're thinking about who identifies, within the book, how much do you think it's more horror for the horror fans? How much is it for us baseball nerds as well?
I
Who,
think it's 50-50. I think it's 50-50. I think we found the right mix. I think one leads to the other, as I was saying, and uh hopefully the baseball moments will make you feel horrified when recalling the horrific moments that came before, if that makes sense.
yeah, and I mean, obviously Henry is doing these horrible things. Without giving too much away, obviously he's going to be doing some very bad things. How does he rationalize that for himself beyond? And 'cause I know you said he felt he did lose a lot, but he's also going to be taking it from a lot of other people who lost. I mean, is he able to rationalize it very easily? Is it just this is what I am now, and it's just kind of part of the deal, or is it?
That's the tension, then that's always the tension when you've got a character who is made into a monster. Um, he might mean well, but he's also got this dark passenger that rides
Hmm.
along with him who compels him to do bad things.
And like I said, I think it's just a very cool concept, and I like it as a fan, you are going to empathize with him to a certain degree because you want people to be, have their dream, but at the same time, obviously, he's doing some really crappy things around him. How else is it? Because you're also having him. I assume when a barnstorming team is. I'm trying to think about 1929 is barnstorming. It's still a full team. I mean, 25 player team, right?
I think that was very much, whoever shows up in some cases. You know what I mean? I don't know what the roster size was, but I have a hard time believing it was uniform.
Is is it
More
difficult?
people mean more people have to be paid.
True. Good point. Good point. Now, when you're thinking about the team itself, how much of the team? Because once again, we're talking about a lot of players. Is it hard to balance these other characters as well? Are there how many are you? Oh, that team are you kind of presenting for the reader? How much are this kind of like background character?
Well, there's a couple of baseball players that become Henry Hayes's teammates who are prominent throughout the series. And then we get some little bits from these colorful characters, different pitchers on different teams, and some of the teams that play Henry's team are really memorable, I'll say.
Is how safe are these teammates with Henry? I mean, does he know to like? Does he have this concept of off limits, or these are my teammates, or is it everyone is potentially prey? Maybe is the best word to say for Henry.
Well, he wants to fit in, so it's not in his best interest to, what's the term? Don't shit where you eat.
Yeah.
And and he wants this, but then that's the tension. It's like, where am I going to fuck up that makes this all impossible for me?
Hmm. That's awesome. So you said this is a five-issue miniseries, is that correct?
Yes.
Without giving away any spoilers, is this five-issue miniseries with the potential for more, or is this going to this is kind of like a cohesive story in its own thing?
There's potential for more. It's always been my ambition to do sports comics, in particular baseball comics. So I've got a couple of other things in the fire, and then potentially we could revisit pastime, I would think. I would hope if it was warranted.
Now, are you planning on keeping it within the 1920s, or are you expanding throughout other generations of baseball?
No, in fact, as the series goes on, the series the entire story is framed by an event in 1988 that is atmospherically relevant to the some of the themes in the book. And then we will flash forward through a few different decades as the story goes on.
Now, I mean, the interesting thing about the character without was gonna give him too much away, but as the nature of the character is, obviously, I kind of figured out the nature of the character. Um, Obviously, he has a unique, depending on how you tell the story, a new vantage point because he will have the ability to see more time than most people will get to experience, and especially in baseball. How much is that? How much is he a product of the time then, and the change that he's going to be experiencing over time?
Well, I mean, he is very much his story is one of a lot of men that went off to fight in France in 1917, and people saw a lot of horrible stuff and came home. They called it shell shock back then,
Hmm.
um, with unexplored post-traumatic stress issues, and so he is very much a product of his era. So you're almost watching someone trying to pick up the pieces that pretty much a generation had to do.
How much of that, um, the PTSD is the nature of war? How much is the damage to him as a person product of what he became? I mean, because that's two horrible things to have to deal with in one. Like one, horrors of war, and then two, the horror of what you are and what you need to do.
Well,
Um,
they're both connected, and that's revealed in the book.
so what can listeners look forward to in upcoming issues of Pastime?
Uh, we've got this really cool team that rolls in that's reminiscent of a barnstorming era team called the House of David,
Never
which were
heard
a
of
bunch
them.
of long-haired hippies, basically with very long beards, who used to play a very flamboyant style of baseball. So we've got a team that's loosely based on these historical, interesting people, and they're going to be showing up. Um, uh, yeah. So
I never heard of them before. I mean, are they sort of like the Savannah Bananas of their time period? I mean, I never heard of them in my life.
yeah, they were called. If you ever watch Ken Burns's baseball, they have
Yeah.
a little segment in there. They were these super crunchy hippies. They were almost described as a cult. And they would play very flamboyantly, sort of like the Harlem Globetrotters, where they would flip the ball behind their back and they would do these acrobatic things on the field. And so we sort of took that as an archetype and then fitted it around what's going on in the story. So we just borrowed a little bit and then extrapolated from it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I did have one other part, back up just a little bit. Talking about Henry and kind of what he is. Are we when you're writing him without giving too much away? Obviously, the type of thing that he is, there's different rules that have existed throughout different fictions. Are we staying more classic, or are we keeping like new rules for the comic book that's being created?
I think, you know, when it comes to writing different sorts of supernatural entities, I prefer to choose from the established tropes. They don't necessarily have to all be there.
Okay, now, the question I was about to ask, I'm going to back out of because that's probably would give too much away. So, well, I'll ask that off the screen maybe. So when can we see our first issue of Pastime, and what's next?
It will be on the stands April 2nd. It hits FOC next Monday, March 10th. And what's next for me is more sports comics. I've got some new things in the work at Madcave and Oni Press, working with a lot of different creators on some new things that are a little bit further down the pipe but are happening presently.
Very cool. Mr. Harris, it was an absolute pleasure. And like I said, pastime sounds was such a cool idea. When I saw it, I was like, I got to interview you. Thank you so much for doing it for me. You've been awesome.
Thank you.
Have a very good day.
You too.